predominantly focused on men's sports and always has been. On a national level, only approximately 4% is focused on female sports. Coverage of women's sports has improved greatly in the last 40 years because women have become more involved in pro sports. The day-to-day coverage, however, is still small in comparison to men's sports, regardless of the type. Coverage is often based on public interest, which increases funds to that program and allows them to increase funding for advertising. So women's sports often lack the funds to advertise and increase their following. Over the last 7 days, I have taken paper copies of the Idaho Press Tribune. The Press Tribune is a local paper that reaches Canyon and Ada counties, so much of it is focused
Did someone just
on
touch my AirPods?
local sports. So in those 7 consecutive days, I've taken the sports section and broken down each page each day into different stories based on sports, male, female, the size of the story, whether there was a picture or not, and broke it down and tallied each one separately so that I could see the percentages of which sport reigned. And the results were that men's stories were 85% of the week's section. Women only had about 15% of that. The men's sports pictures that came along with each story was 97%. So you can see in the media totals, the pictures, men had about 62 of the 64 pictures that were set in the sports section throughout the week, and women only had 2 pictures. Men had 95 sports stories, and women had 17. And of those 17 women's sports stories, only one made the front page, the bottom of the front page with a picture. The other 4 of those 17 had some commentary and was a story. But then the other 12 were scores mixed in with other men's sports. And often those men's stories were before the women's. Each of the men's stories were long, detailed. 83 were full stories and 12 scores. So following the weekly trends graph, you can see that men's stories dominated. And even that second line down, the men's pictures were even above the women's stories by great measure throughout the entire week. What dominated the most was collegiate sports, BSU, Vandals, and the Yotes. Now we are in football season right now, so that is expected. But there's also a lot of other women's sports that are going on right now, like golf, tennis, cross country, soccer. But they were barely mentioned, and when they were, it was mostly just scores. But even on that high school level, the coverage was football. And of the other sports, boys soccer, cross country, and golf was mentioned first before the female sports. I found it surprising that on a local level, where we would have expected a lot more backing for even our girls' high school sports teams, that there wasn't very much mention of it. So the local level kind of mirrors the national and even global level of women's sports. It is not represented very well. And so with that, the growth of women's sports and media coverage is stunted by the fact that the following doesn't get to see the scores and the good stories in comparison to what's thrown in our face with football and boys soccer and Major League Baseball, stuff like that. And so it would be nice to get a little bit more backing from the public to demand coverage of women's sports.